Hey, I'm Rogue Sun, New Orleans' favorite superhero. This week, sibling rivalry takes on a whole new meaning when my half-sister finds a second sunstone and becomes her own Rogue Sun. Plus, who's noxious? And why does his smoke look so damn cool? Oh, and when am I gonna get to use my new... There it is. It's a new dawn for Rogue Sun, and you're not gonna want to miss any of it. Grab Rogue Sun 25, lighting up comic stores this Wednesday.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Rogue Sun live stream. Oh, hold on, I'm getting echo through someone else. Can you guys hear that?
Yep.
Yeah.
You have a tab open?
It's not me.
There. That did it.
Now it's gone.
Okay, cool. Welcome to the Rogue Sun live stream for Rogue Sun issues 25 and 26. I am your host and series editor, Michael Busuttil. Today I am joined by co-creator and co-writer Ryan Parrott.
Hi.
Co-writer Nick Cotton.
Hello.
And Radiant Black co-creator and writer Kyle Higgins.
How's it going, guys?
Today we are going to be talking about Rogue Sun issues 25 and 26. They're the first two issues of the new arc that's currently happening. As a general warning, we will be spoiling things from those issues. So if you haven't read them yet, you can probably jump off this right now, go to your comic shop really quick, pick them up, read them, and be back before we're done. I think that's reasonable and achievable to ask of people. So, let's talk about this current arc in Rogue Sun. Ryan and Nick, what can you tell people about, how we've gotten to this point and what things are going on at the moment?
What can we say? Like a recap of all 24 issues prior to this? Probably not.
Just the sort of, what has happened most recently?
Most recently, what happened most recently? Yeah, sorry, it's all jumbled me when you get into these things. Basically, going into 24, we discovered that there's going to be a new Rogue Sun, and as you can see the cover right there, or an additional Rogue Sun in the form of Ari Bell, who is Dylan's half-sister, who has also gotten a Sunstone and has a new mentor by the name of Caleb Hawthorne, who is the first Rogue Sun, and that was one of the bad guys we beat in, I think it was like Volume 3, I think that was that. And so he sort of turned over newly for seemingly so, and so it's basically turned into sort of a story of like Dylan. And Dylan's just coming into his own as a Rogue Sun, and now we have, Ari stepping in as well. So we've got two people who are a little bit at odds with one another, slowly getting to having to sort of work together, and Dylan's not particularly happy about it. So yeah, actually that's in the next issue. That's not even 25. Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
So
sorry, I didn't see a thing before, so I don't know what some of the questions are. So it's okay.
I would like to sort of take a step back from the in-universe stuff and talk about out-of-universe, you guys as writers. Why a second Rogue Sun? Why Ori? Why make that decision?
I mean, I think we talked about it early on is like this book's sort of always been about family. That the first volume is really about sort of a giant sort of superhero metaphor for a divorce. Volume 2 was kind of about step parents and what it's like to deal with, the different people who sort of form you in your life. And then Volume 3 was sort of about, sort of reckoning with sort of, the feelings of fathers and sons and all that stuff. So when we got to this point, we were like, well, wouldn't it be interesting? I mean, I've talked about this a little bit. I was a nanny for 5 or 6 years before I became a writer. And I was nanny for 2 boys, both of which are professional baseball players now. So I'm very proud of that. And what was interesting about that was there was the older boy who was playing, who was a baseball player, and then his brother came in, and they loved each other. They were very, very strong. They were really great. But then they both started playing on the same baseball team, and that love turned into, they would help each other some days, and they would hate each other others, and then they would sort of struggle with stuff. And I just thought, wow, it's so crazy when someone sort of steps into that little place that is part of your identity, in the sense of like, the older one sort of says, oh, this is my world, and that kid came into that. And there's a lot of friction that comes out of that. And so I thought that would be sort of an interesting way of doing this, where we finally got Dylan to a place, right around issue 24, where he felt like he was actually getting good at being Rogue Son and had sort of defined his identity with that. And then suddenly having Ari sort of step into that, and how is he going to react to that? How is he going to handle that, for better or for worse? It just seemed like a good way to sort of change up the story a little bit, but also, center it less up. We've done 24 issues of fathers and sons. It felt like we had an opportunity to sort of make it about brothers and sisters.
Cool. So let's start talking about issue 25. And I want to start with this opening scene where Dylan is sort of stopping a bank robbery escape in progress and encounters someone he knows. This scene hasn't paid off yet. We haven't seen anything happen beyond that. But I'd love to talk about how, why this for the opening of a new arc is, I guess, the question.
I think you had that question when I first pitched it to you. The thing that I liked about it was we'd seen Dylan fight monsters in a lot of introductions, a lot of, taking down different characters for like really small amounts and like really small integers. And I thought it would be interesting to change things up a little bit with something that they wouldn't expect, which is actually having him sort of fight sort of the traditional bad guys, the armored car robbery. And what I liked about that was it just sort of like threw things a little bit. And more importantly, what it did for me thematically was I liked the idea at the end of the scene when he stops he's sort of enjoying it. He's sort of like, enjoying it's like he says, it's so nice not to have to fight a witch or a giant, werewolf for a change. And then him basically finding this last guy who's getting away and grabbing him and suddenly realizing he knows him. And that they obviously have a past, and the idea that he would let him go, because thematically what I wanted this next arc to be about, and what Nick and I talked a lot about, was this idea of this is a story in some ways about sort of the definition of right and wrong, and the idea of putting Marcus and Dylan's perspective on who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, what constitutes something that's punishable, what's not, and their sort of moral codes, and putting those two things sort of at odds with each other. So having Marcus watch Dylan let a kid go, who he would never let go, is the sort of the first spark that sort of like sets this story, and then we'll see that escalate throughout the next arc. So that was sort of the intention there. And also there's a lot of fun jokes with, like, I like to throw a radiant black joke in there when possible, right?
From there we go to Ori talking to Caleb. So you've explained why a new Rogue Son and why Ori. Was Caleb always going to be part of that story as well?
Yes, kinda. Yeah, like when we brought him in, I know we brought him into the story. He sort of went from being a good mentor for a seemingly good mentor for Dylan, and then the way that we wanted to have it, or the way that we talked about it, was like I looked at it was like I liked the idea of Marcus had been sort of this sort of taskmaster to Dylan, somebody who was very harsh on him, wasn't particularly nice, but had his best intentions in heart. And the idea that I wanted to contrast that with bringing Caleb, who was somebody who was seemingly very kind and very honest, or kind and sweet to Dylan, but didn't have his best interest at heart. And the idea of Dylan sort of realizing that those are the two different ways that somebody can approach you. And so when we took him off the table, I remember at the moment when we were like deciding how to defeat him, we had this idea of like, oh wait, well Dylan, like Ari had was using Demonica's powers, and so she just sort of inhaled him because that was something that had been planned up earlier. And then I was like, oh wow, there's actually fire alarm going off at the moment in our house. Hold on one second, I'm gonna go check on that. Or maybe Nick's going to go check on that. Thanks, buddy. Sorry about that, guys. Real life comes smashing too. But the idea was
This issue's just too hot, Ryan. Too hot.
It is too hot. Too much fire. But so the idea was when she swallowed him, I was like, oh, there was something really interesting about that. But it like kind of made me realize, oh wow, we could actually bring him back in an interesting way. There's an opportunity to sort of, now that he's out of the Sunstone and connected her in a fun way, that sort of opened up that's sort of where my mind went, oh, we can actually make this a different type of story, and we can bring him in a way that wasn't expected. And also, like, the one thing I've been saying is he was one of the first Rogue Sons. I think when we first meet him, he has a lot of he has a lot of good intentions. He, I think he just went through, a few centuries of watching us sort of screw up over and over again that sort of twisted his sort of perspective on the world. But that doesn't mean he's like innately evil. But I also don't, that I just like the idea that we suddenly have a more complicated character. He's not just, a rogue son who is, on the right path. He might have very different perspectives in the same way that Marcus and Dylan are dealing with their moral code. I think Caleb's moral code is always sort of shifting and changing as the centuries go along.
Absolutely. So speaking of Marcus and Dylan being in conflict, there's another element of that conflict coming up here where Dylan basically finds out that his dad figured he would hate doing this and would want to quit immediately. Can you talk a little bit about this plot development and why it comes in here and now?
I think part of it came from there was like an in-universe decision and sort of an outside universe decision. The outside universe decision was we wanted to try, with 25, we want to use it as an opportunity for people to sort of jump on the book. If anybody who had been interested in it but hadn't picked it up, giving it an opportunity to sort of start over and be like, okay, here's a way that we can sort of talk about everything that had happened. But the in-universe aspect of it was like, we realized really early on that was like Marcus made kind of a rash decision by giving the Sunstone to Dylan, somebody he didn't really know anything about. He sort of did it to sort of protect his other kids and to sort of because he figured, okay, if something happens to Dylan, like it's not the end of the world. So he kind of made this choice without realizing that if he'd sort of survived and thinking it through. So we're like, okay, maybe is there a version where he had sort of a backup plan? This idea that he was sort of like, okay, if something does go wrong and Dylan ends up being a monster, is there any way that I can sort of course correct? And so that's sort of where we came up with the idea, was just a sort of concept of like, okay, maybe there is a larger sort of logistical element that he has had that Marcus had going. And then what I liked about it also was we'd also sort of reached a spot where Marcus and Dylan were at a pretty good, they'd gone through a lot together. Dylan knows Marcus now. Marcus knows Dylan a little better. They kind of they're sort of they kind of get along for a little bit. What was something we could throw into the mix that could mess with that a little bit? That could be something that actually shows how much they change and shows how much Marcus's opinion of Dylan has shifted.
Sure. Speaking of the possibility of Dylan having become a monster, we have a new villain in this arc. We don't know a ton about him yet, so I want to be careful of spoiling some of the stuff that's coming down the pipe. But what can you guys tell us about Noxious?
Well, I think Nick wrote this scene, did the first pass on this scene. Did you? I think you did, right?
Oh, yep.
Yeah.
This was when we had a very sort of open-ended idea of where we wanted to go with him, and but we did have some very strong opinions about what we wanted to do differently from like our other villains. And I know at least part of the conversation that I really gravitated towards was like, how sympathetic can the villains get? While also being terrifying. And I think with Noxious, it was one of those uncertainties about how big of a piece he was going to play through the arc. And especially when the designs came through, I know that's when we really committed to like going all the way with him. So this was, I think, a very successful approach to keeping things open and as the character sort of got clarified, that we could like really ramp into like what it was that he was doing. So we've now got a very clear idea, and as we wrap this up, a lot of what's motivating him is going to make a lot of sense to the audience, and it's going to create a lot of conflict between Ari and Dylan and their mentors about what's the right thing to be doing.
Yeah. And also to that point, one of the things that's been fun is like when we say that sometimes it's like we'll come up with a concept for a character and then we give that to Abel and Abel will design it. And so when the design comes in, sometimes that changes the way that we write them, that changes the way that we sort of approach them. Like I knew when like it's just kind of fun because like we don't do a lot of versions of characters. Like there's not a lot of back and forth notes with Abel. Abel usually gets it right the first time, or he takes it in a direction that we didn't expect, and then so we'll be like, oh, wait a minute, okay, that's the visual we're going for. We'll sort of adjust it and flip it. Which I actually think is really fun. It's a fun sort of exciting way because like I think what's great is it keeps me on my toes a little bit with regards to how we personify the characters because of the way that Abel's able to sort of like bring them to life.
Yeah, I was going to say I can think of maybe one or two characters in the sort of entire run where we've been like, oh, that's actually not doing what we needed to do. Can we take a second pass at it? And this was another one where you sent an email like, here's what we're thinking of doing. And it was just one design came back. That's him. That's the guy. Job done.
Yeah. I think the only one we ever went through like multiple permutations was Hellbent went through like a bunch just because I think I had a very specific idea of what I wanted that character to ultimately be. But most of the time it's usually like, we get the sketch and we're like, oh, that's fun, Yeah,
absolutely. So from there, we get not Radiant Black, sorry. We get Rogue Sun versus Noxious, and then a second Rogue Sun involved. I'd love to talk to the two of you a little bit about fight scenes where 25 issues in, how do you come up with cool new stuff like a flaming Morningstar on a flail to really keep the fights interesting and keep the action different?
I know from my perspective, some of it comes from fans. And I know you shouldn't say that, but it's true. It's like, I got so many people who asked me, when we had the Night Sun, when he had the sword, we had a bunch of people saying, well, like, wait a minute, if he's got a sword, like, if Night Sun has a sword, then what's Rogue Sun's weapon? And I remember I was like, I knew that he kind of had a weapon because obviously we had Night Sun go through all of those different versions when he took over his body, and then when we went into the Sunstone, we saw that Viking Sun had like a big axe. So it's like it made sense that Dylan would have a weapon, but I think we went through a bunch of different versions. And Nick, were you the one who was like, "Oh, this is what a Morningstar is," and I was like, "Oh, that's perfect." I think that's what it was. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah. So you had the visual concept that you wanted, and then I thought you might have already known because you just happened to pick a weapon that was the Morningstar. And so what's great about
this is 100%, 100 hours new.
Well, I think the other part is when you decided the weapon. I think then there becomes a lot of questions to answer about Dylan and his connection to our villain, and like. Because it's not like Dylan summoned like an idea of what he wanted his weapon to be, or at least that's not what we have decided yet. It's
right.
Like what weapon came about is coming from something deeper, and I think that's something that we can explore later down the road.
Yeah, I do remember when you told me the name of it, I was like, I think, can we swear on this? No, can we do that? Yes. I was like, you got to be blanking me. Yeah, I was like, you got to be shitting me. Yeah. Like, I think when you told me the name, I was like, oh, like that's too perfect. So
and it's too perfect. It's something that we there's a lot of opportunity. And in terms of the selection of like bringing in those sort of weapons, being able to have your hero ramp up and then have something that can like be taken away from him to make a fight scene feel like they're. Like your hero has been ramped back. Like these are really important for creating tension through fight scenes, and frankly, giving our artists like really dynamic things to draw. And so like the combinations as we're seeing on this page right here, like the twisting of the flail wrapping around our hero while the smoke is billowing around our villain. Like they really. Like nailed the counterpoints that we're able to create, just like we were designing a fight, say in cinema, like where we're just like really giving ideas to the people that take a hold of this IP and like imagine where else it might be able to go.
Yeah, and I'm a sucker for a flaming chain. I mean, I'm like more chain, Abel, more chain, as much chain as we can get on the page.
You've said literally that email. At least
I am. I'm like more chain. I want as much chain as we can get. Yeah.
From there, after this fight, Noxious gets away to be a bad guy in later issues of the series. Ori more or less immediately gives the game away. She's like, hey, it's me. I'm a new Rogue Sun. This is what's going on. Did you guys ever think about versions where that was more of a secret for longer?
I think I ultimately decided not to do that because I didn't want the audience to be that far ahead of of us. Like, the idea of like it would make Dylan look. I was worried it would make Dylan look dumb if like we knew that Ari was the bad guy. Was not the bad guy, but we knew that she was the new Rogue Sun, and he didn't. And it felt like what was interesting to me, what was better, was getting right to the conflict of Ari being a Rogue Sun, as opposed to the longer we held that out, the less we would have time with the two of them sort of, like grading one another. So that's, I think, ultimately why we decided to go for that. And also, I wasn't quite sure why she would want to hide it, because it's like the longer she did, the more angry he would be, and it felt like a smart tactical move on her point. Just be like, hey, I'm just gonna get this right out of the gate and just let you know so that you don't think I'm hiding anything from you. I think it was the original thing. I mean, I'm sure there was a version where we did kind of go down that road and made it more of a mystery of who. And to be fair, I think if we hadn't shown people that she was, like, if we just introduced a Rogue Sun, just to say, I've done this I did this with the Green Power Ranger and Power Rangers, and it was like, if it's you got to create enough. We would have had to create more like suspects and actually make it more of a thing. And I just felt like ultimately it's like, let's just get to what I think is the most interesting part, which is the idea that his sister is a Rogue Sun, as opposed to, oh man, there's another one that's sort of flying around. It feels like there wasn't a lot of juice to squeeze out of that, I thought. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Absolutely. From there, Dylan and Marcus have somewhat different reactions to this, as they have had to basically everything else for their entire lives. But they do kind of end up on the same page here. I'd love to talk a bit about, we've had them at extreme odds. We've had them very much aligned. We've had them all along the middle of that spectrum. How do you guys decide, like, what the right position for that relationship is at a given moment?
I think it's sort of a case-by-case basis. I think, with the kind of I'm not going to say that the characters speak to us or any of that stuff, because I don't know if that's necessarily true. But I do think that, like, there's moments where you write a scene and you're like, you can tell real quickly whether or not that's the characters will disagree with you inherently. There's like, it's usually when you have a hard time writing a scene and you're like, okay, wait a minute, something's wrong here. And it's usually because I'm trying to write a character to have a perspective on something that all the things that we've established are sort of intrinsically against. And so what this one, I think in particular about, I remember really liking where we got to at the end of this issue with Dylan basically saying, like, I thought, like, him basically revealing to him, going like, yeah, you were a guy who never gave me anything. You spent my entire life, you weren't even around, you left nothing, and then you gave me the thing that was the most precious thing in your life. You gave me your superhero mantle, and that was like a big deal to me, and really cared. And then I discovered that you were just kind of holding out until you didn't really believe in me. You're just sort of holding out until you could find someone better. And that his reaction to, I really liked how that felt like such a big sort of like, man, you got me again. And the idea that that's why he was considering walking away from all of this stuff, because he was just like, what is this? What am I really doing this for? I think that was the other thing that we really talked about in this issue was, we've talked a lot about Dylan only becoming Rogue Sun because he desperately wanted to prove to his dad that he was better than him. But their relationship has changed a lot over 24 issues. And so I think one of the things we talked about with this was by having somebody come in like Abernathy and say, hey, do you think you should do this? Do you think this is you're the best Rogue Sun to do this job? Do you think that you have, like, look at all the mistakes you've made? Look at, I'm not saying that I'm going to take it away from you, but do you really think you're the best person for this? While at the same time suddenly having Ari step into that role, which is somebody we've talked a lot about being somebody that probably should have been the right person and wasn't for lots of reasons. It gave Dylan this really interesting introspective moment where he's like, maybe I'm maybe I'm not the right person for it. And why am I doing this? Do I want to be Rogue Sun? Let me decide that I'm not doing this because I want to prove somebody wrong. I'm doing this because let me question why I'm doing this at every level. And that was the thing that I think we got really excited about, was sort of like putting them at odds in the sense of like Marcus going, well, you were my only option. Now you might not be. There's no one hunting me. There's, that Gwen's been found out. So Ari could be the right person this time, and maybe I could be the mentor for her. And so I think we just left it at this really interesting spot where everybody's sort of assessing who they are and what they want. And I think that's what we wanted to do for a book that is sort of like a stepping on point for new readers.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the end of this issue, where Dylan sees his mother for the first time since the first arc of the book. Why now?
Just split lemon water in my face. Oh, it was awful. I think one, it was to remind people that she's a big part of the story. We had gone a long time without seeing her, and it was like, she is fundamentally one of the biggest reasons why he is still Rogue Sun, and him revealing that, I think, was important, because I think it tells you exactly what he is like. He can pretend that he doesn't care that his mom's locked away. He can pretend that he's still dealing with that, but this is a person who still very, very much misses her and still very much wants to find a way to free her. I don't think this is a spoiler, but should I say it? I don't know.
Start saying it and I'll yell at you if it's too bad.
We hint at something in the Nick and I hinted at something in the Nick's already laughing, so he knows what I'm going to talk about. In the flipbook issue, there's a thing that that Dylan says at the end of the issue, which is the thing that if my father ever found out what I'm doing, then he would be angry. And this is what we were alluding to. This is why he's still Rogue Sun. Like, he wants to free his mom, but he can't tell Marcus that. He can't tell Marcus that that's the reason he's doing that. And that was what we were kind of alluding to. I think that's not a huge spoiler, because I think that you could probably, guess that, but that was what we were aiming at. So if people were like, wait, this is me saying I meant to pay that off, that was what we were talking about at that moment, was sort of like that thing. I don't think it's a huge spoiler, but that's the way we were talking about it.
Great.
But there's another secret in there that we haven't revealed, so that's also part of it. So
that was too much, and you shouldn't have said it. But it's too
damn.
I knew we'd cross the line eventually. That brings us to the end of issue 25, and I would like to start talking about issue 26. Before we do, is there anything else on 25 you guys would like to talk about?
No, it was really fun. Abel did a fantastic job. That was a really, really hard issue, because we gave him a whole bunch of extra pages at the end there, and he just killed it. So, and so did you, by the way, Michael. You killed it. You did work really hard on that. I know you hate it when I do that, but since we don't talk as much as we should, and I don't see your face as often, I should point out that this was a lot of work trying to get this all done. Anything that's over 22 pages means there's more art, or it doubles all your work, and this was a tough one. And I think this is the first issue we did in a long time. Not a long time, because that sounds like we didn't work, but we put there was a lot of back and forth on this.
We did a lot more back and forth on this one than we would normally do on an issue of Rogue Sun, for sure.
Yes, totally. And I think the book paid off from that immensely, from the ability to everybody chiming in and changing things and adjusting things and reworking stuff. I think we found a nice little sweet spot there. I wish we had that kind of I wish we did that every issue, but such is life.
We are going to now talk about issue 26, and to do that, because of this guy, what's on the cover, Kyle, can you put yourself back in the chat? Hey, look everyone. Who it is.
What's up?
So, I'd love to, before we get into the meat of the issue itself, you guys basically just sent me a message one day and were like, hey, we're doing a crossover in these issues. Can you tell me about the discussions that you guys had that led us to that point?
Yeah. I mean, it started with Ryan wanting to do a crossover. And
trying to
asking multiple times, can we do a crossover? Can we do a crossover? When are we doing a crossover? And I had to explain to him every time, that's what Supermassive is for. We're trying to keep the books accessible. We're not going to do traditional crossover, etc. And so finally,
I broke you.
Supermassive, yeah, we had the conversation, especially with coming back with our rebuild eras and Rogue Sun in particular. It was like, you know what? Now's the time to do a crossover and do it in, you know, a version of the same kind of approach that we had on the Lord Drac and Ranger Slayer scene between Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and Go-Go during Shattered Grid. So our goal was to keep it really accessible. You're only seeing the first side of it here, the Rogue Sun side. How Radiant Black and a Blood Moon ended up here is what you'll have to pick up Radiant Black to find out. But it was really exciting to Ryan and myself that the scenes between the characters work for both characters' arcs and what they're going through. And I think they do. I think it works really, really well. So that's where it started. Yeah.
For me, it was a few things. One, it was when I realized that Dylan and Marshall hadn't like officially met yet. We'd done all these different variations of it, and I was like, you know, it's because I was like, oh, well, that would make it special. Like that would make it. It's not like, hey, it's good to see you again. Let's get in a little adventure. It was more like, oh, let's do that. And also, I've always felt I love the Supermassives. They're super fun to do, but when you have that many characters in each one of them, it's like you never really get we never really get long scenes of conversations and jokes. And I remember Nick and I were talking about this, and I was like, this is going to be so much fun to actually have Dylan and Marshall in the same book because their temperament, like, I think we would have had a very different book if Nathan had been Radiant Black and we'd done this in the first, 2 volumes or whatever. We'd have a very different crossover. And so when we were really, I remember we got really excited about the idea of trying to write Marshall and Dylan one-upping each other over and over again. The idea, that was a fun, like, that was the part that I got like creatively excited about, was I was like, this is going to be a good combination. And then also when we started talking about it, when I realized it was like, okay, we can make this work. I remember why I was pitching, like, I was going to pitch you like an early version of the story, Kyle, and then I think it was like something I was like, oh, wait a minute, like, I'm telling a Radiant Black story, and I was like, no, like, I gotta get rid of that and make this a Rogue Sun story, and the idea was to use Radiant Black as the same way we used Divinity in the earlier arc. It was just like a character that comes into the story, and Dylan's on a path, and this character comes in, and that changes the trajectory of his path. And that would mean that you wouldn't have to have read all of Radiant Black to understand the Rogue Sun story of it. It helps, obviously, but it would feel like, I was like, oh, we've done this before. You didn't know. Divinity could have had 3 volumes of a story, but the way she comes in, you just have to introduce her in a way that hopefully makes sense. And so I thought when we got to that creatively, it made sense to me, and it felt like, oh, we can do this without it feeling like we're forcing it.
Yeah, and not to be just the guy who talks about logistics all the time, but I am the logistics guy. It was a rare opportunity to be in a position where the two of you were sort of defining arcs at the same time. Yeah. Like, a lot of the time we're thinking 3, 6, 9 months ahead in the book, like, what's next immediately, what's next medium term, what's next longer term. This was a time where both books had taken one step back and could go like, okay, actually we know what issues are going to be coming out right alongside each other. We know who's going to be in their stories when. There's a bit of sort of thematic crossover here that we can do, and then spin that out into the rest of those arcs so it doesn't just feel like a weird little one-off adventure. It ties into both of their stories moving forward.
And also, I think there was something I was thinking early on, too, which is this idea of, like, this is the Massiverse. And, like, if we're a universe, we should take advantage of that. Like, I don't mean that in, like a sales perspective. I just mean that from the perspective of, like, Rogue's Radiant Black can come into our world, so let's do it. Like, let's actually take advantage of that and really and do it. And because the great thing about doing this thing with my friends is I can just text. I can sit next to Kyle at a convention and be like, "Hey, can we do this?" And he'd be like, "Yeah, sure." Like, that's the level of approvals that we need, which is awesome. So, like, that part I think is just such a fun element of doing comic books with your friends is you can just do stuff like that. I can text Kyle. It's great. It's that simple.
So with that, I would love to talk about some of the more crossover-y elements. Why Clyde Bloodmoon as a villain across both books?
Okay, honest truth, because Ryan didn't give me a lot of villain options that were available.
They're all locked up. Dylan's too good at his job.
Rogue Sun does his job, is the thing. There's no one in the wind for us to deal with. I think I went through every issue of Rogue Sun and was like, okay, there's two people. It's either you guys make up a new guy, or there's two people who are loose at the moment that you could pick from.
Well, and it's funny because Ryan's created... The joke is Ryan has more villains than issues of Rogue Sun, and that's actually true. But there were none available, so except the Blood Moons. And I have to admit, I do... For as much as I prefer, like, my Batman comics, for example, to be grounded, I love Man-Bat, and I think it has to do with the Batman the Animated Series episodes, the On Leather Wings, and then the whatever the other one is where he comes back. I just love that character. So Ryan creating a werewolf, vampire, Man-Bat type creature here just felt like, yeah, I got to do this, especially because, well, the cover for Radiant Black is kind of inspired by, very loosely, one of my first monthly comics that I bought, which was like I believe it was issue 16 or 17 of Nightwing, and it's Nightwing fighting Man-Bat on the cover. This is in like the mid-90s. So the idea that Radiant Black would now be fighting our version of a Man-Bat felt, I don't know, just felt like a little bit of symmetry.
Absolutely. So let's talk about how this crossover comes together. I don't want to... It's tough because the Radiant Black half of this story is not out yet, so I don't want to spoil anything. But can you guys talk a little bit about, in this issue of Rogue Sun, we get a full Rogue Sun adventure where Clyde Bloodmoon shows up at the start and they deal with him and they go away at the end. The Radiant Black half of this crossover intermingles with that story in interesting ways. Can you guys talk about the experience of co-writing those stories together?
Yeah, it was. We broke the story together. We broke the story. Nick and I broke the story together and sort of like, and then sent it off to Kyle. And Kyle was like, and then Kyle kind of gave me back what he was thinking with his arc, and we sort of went back and forth a few times. And I think like I said, it was like finding that spot where we could have Radiant Black come in a way that makes sense, but allowed for, I don't know how you say it, like allowed for, like you said, you come in and come out of the story, but suggest a larger story, but one that wasn't confusing for the one that you were reading. Does that sound about right? Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, the thing that was key for me was, I remember I was in a awesome little coffee shop in Australia, and I had this kind of like realization. Ryan and I were texting about this, and Michael, you and I were chatting at the same time, and I had this realization of like, as long as the scene between Nathan and Marshall and Dylan wraps up in a way that feels like it's a button, and you turn the page, Marshall and Dylan can be walking out of a portal back in Chicago, carrying drinks and food, and it'll play like, oh, that's just what they went and did and had a night. And if you read Rogue Sun, though, you're gonna see all of what actually happened on the other side of that. And that was the thing that unlocked it for me, I guess that spoils a little bit of how we tackle things in Radiant Black, but I like the idea. I like the idea of different perspectives on kind of the same event and how that event can be additive, like we said, to each character's own journey that they're on.
Yeah, and then we had like our own mini little supermassive where like you'd write the scene and then I'd rewrite all my characters' dialogue and then you write all your characters' dialogue, and it's just but the nice thing about that is like you get a very honest scene because it's both of us like being very protective of our characters and stuff. So no one says anything they wouldn't normally say, which is kind of fun.
So
Totally.
on that note, the question that I would love to ask you is, what do these two think of each other?
Oh man. Well, I don't know how aware of Rogue Sun Marshall is. I guess he would be across that kind of thing though, like, because he met Marcus first and was a fan. So he's aware that there's another one around. He's technically met him and suspected that he's younger, dating back to Supermassive 2023. He probably thinks the fire is dope. Like, and Rogue Sun's got a sword, and if there's anything Marshall would be jealous for, it would be a sword.
We've got to work out a way to give him a sword. We've talked about it so many times now.
I don't know that the world, much less the Massiverse, could handle Marshall with a sword. Have you seen him in God mode?
He would pull out the sword, and the next page would be him at the hospital having cut one of his legs off. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a friend that did that, but we won't get into that right now.
It is
Well, there's
cruel and unusual to say that and then be like, but I'm not going to say anything more about it.
There was an incident in the world of our former books and fandom that involved a sword.
We're moving on from that. That's way too much of a bummer. Ryan, what does Marshall think? What does Dylan think of Marshall?
I mean, Dylan dislikes pretty much everybody inherently. He's a 17-year-old kid who thinks he's smarter than everybody else. So like, I guarantee he thinks he's smarter than Marshall and annoyed by anything. He's just like, if you've ever met a 17-year-old boy, it's just like, they're like, I don't want to deal with this. I've got other things to do. Like, why are you talking to me? So I think he definitely, like, he's respectful of him. I think I would say the way he talks to him, like, he's definitely. Yeah. I think the thing that unlocked this for Nick when we started talking about was just like how they could be. How could, like, the fun part was how could they work together where they aren't directly like, you suck, but they both were like, let me show you how it's done. And granted, the funny thing is neither one of them have been superheroes for very long, but yet they're just automatically this thing of like, I love that Dylan is automatically being like, look, man, I know you play with tiny robots and stuff, but I deal with supernatural stuff, and then gets clocked in the face. And then like the idea that they're both like wanting the credit for the way that they fight him. And so I just thought that was when we got to that, I was like, that's the fun, that was the whole reason for me to do the issue, was like, I wanted those scenes. I wanted as many bantery moments between them where they were sort of like trying to show the other person how it's done as we could get. So I feel like, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's definitely what I thought was the most entertaining part of their relationship.
I just want to mention that I pitched at one point, and there was just no space for it in the book, the idea that Brock would think Radiant Black was the absolute coolest. That he would just be like, that's a superhero. And Dylan would have to be like, I'm Rogue Sun. I'd be like, yeah, that's Radiant Black. He saved Chicago.
We are 100% doing that at some point down the line. That is going to be in this book. Yes.
That brings us then to a brand new bad guy, because you just love creating them. What can you tell us about Grandma Blood Moon?
This was, and this was 100% Nick's idea. We had talked a little bit about, I think one of the things we talked about when we decided that Clyde Bloodman was going to be the villain, we were like, okay, well, one of the reasons we did Clyde was because if you're going to make a series, a story, a one-off or two-off issue story that's really about Rogue Sun and Radiant Black being together, the idea of creating a whole new villain that's going to require a whole new explanation and all that stuff felt like that was like, okay, let's get to that as that. Let's cut out the middleman by just using a villain that we already know. However, I think in my mind, I was like, Clyde got his butt kicked the first time he fought Rogue Sun by himself. So if we're going to bring him into the story, suddenly he's going to be able to take on Radiant Black and Rogue Sun and another Rogue Sun all by themselves. So we've got to find a way to sort of up the ante a little bit with him. And so when we came to this part of the story where it's like, okay, he releases, I was like, he's got to run somewhere or go somewhere where we can, like, really level him up. And I don't remember what it was like. I think we had come on the idea that he'd go to a place that gave him power and all that stuff. And I believe Nick was like, or we could do like another member of the family. And I was like, and he was like, what about Grandma Blood Moon? And I was like, oh, I think you said Grandma Blood Moon. I was like, oh, that's fantastic. And then the minute that was in, visually, I thought it was interesting. The idea of kind of doing I don't want to steal this, but some variation off of Grandma from Preacher, I thought was like a fun version of this. And it added just another little turn to the mythology that we've already sort of set up with the Blood Moon with the Blood Moon clan and everything like that. So it just felt like a fun, interesting character that we will see again. Just one, because of the visual design that Abel did, and two, I really like this idea of like, she just feels like a more interesting, godmother character that could be really complicated. And the idea that this is going to have consequences, like coming there, fighting her. This isn't a one-off, oh, we had a fun little thing where we boosted him up. Like, she's going to become a player in the story to come.
Sure. We're going to talk about that for sure in a second. But before we do, we talked earlier about, coming up with new ways to tell different kinds of fight scenes as you've gotten this deep into a book. To what degree does it change it when you add a whole other character with a whole other suite of powers?
Are you talking about Radiant Black, or are you talking about...
Yeah. This isn't just a regular Rogue Sun fight scene. You've also got a guy with gravity powers in the mix.
Well, yeah, Nick and I went back and forth on, like, how to do, like, what are we doing? It was actually fun. I was like, oh, wait, we got somebody who can throw a truck at people? Let's do that. And I think that was the fun part, was when we were like, okay, if we're gonna have an ending where you have three heroes, like, in the situation, like, I was like, how does everybody feel like they're involved? How do we make this fair to everybody, where everybody's sort of like, no one really gets the credit, and we all kind of do that thing. It was like a way to sort of make everybody feel part of it. And it was like, so that was the fun part of like, okay, so we could use, you could use the Morning Star thing. We could have, Marshall, use it as like projectile it, but also the only reason it happens is because Ari was smarter than the other two, and was able to sort of figure out the weakness. And so that was like the thing where it's like, well, if there hadn't been the three of them, they might not have survived. So that was the other fun part about that, was like thinking about it as a way to service all the different characters, while also trying to come up with like a creative way, and hopefully one that doesn't require 3 pages of action to pull off.
Sure. As this fight ends, we get Marshall's first ever intergenerational curse. I don't want to ask you guys to spoil anything. Obviously, you're doing setup. Is there anything you guys want to tease about what's going on here?
Well, Nick wrote this. I love it because I was like, hey, like Nick, like, write this and we'll talk about it. And he wrote this, and he pitched me a lot of the cool stuff that he was going to do and what it means. And I remember you pitched it to you. He wrote the whole thing, and he's like, you can just take 2 lines out of this. I'm like, no. We're putting the whole thing in, because there's a lot of really cool stuff. I actually don't want to spoil any of it. I know I wish you could, but there's some stuff in there that it was neat, because it was like a fun thing. We had reached this point where we knew we wanted there to be like my favorite part was, we was like, they should get a curse, and then Marshall should be like, none of that applied to me, right? Like, I just was showing up here and I don't need that. I just thought that was awesome. But then we came up with the curse, and Nick was like, what about this? And he had sort of tied in things that I had sort of like casually pitched for the next 2-3 issues, and even stuff beyond that. And I was like, oh, wow, you put more thought into that than I would have done, which was really nice. That's the fun part of working with a co-writer sometimes, is like, they just think things differently than you, and they add things up, and Nick did a great job of sort of adding pieces in there that I hadn't expected. So, there's definitely some stuff in there that if you dissect, and also as you read forward, you'll see that there's some stuff that's going to be a problem.
And Nick, am I remembering correctly that this was like the second pass of this curse? I vaguely remember a completely different version that we saw before this one.
Nope, you're muted. There you go.
So, this is pretty close to the original, but there was a lot of tweaking in terms of like how dynamic, like, the poetry of the thing went. Yeah. And I think that was a bit of nervousness on my part on just how I don't know. Saccharine is not the right word, but there's so many different ways that people handle the introduction of magic, especially when it's like intelligible, like English. Like I had a whole version of this where I basically took the ideas and then like tried to convert it into Latin and see how that goes. But that just didn't feel right for this at all. But no, this was very much a sense of like a lot of ideas that I wanted to have pitched to Ryan about like where we could go with some things. And I just bundled it in here. And then this became the mechanism by which I was like, hey, so I know we're just working on this right now, but since this has to nod to the future, I was thinking this. And I was really happy with how well that I feel like I need to pitch more of my future ideas via poetry because Ryan responds. That might be awkward and it might take a little bit long, but no. So no, there wasn't too much of a different version beyond some of the poetics.
Sure. I have to give you real credit. Genuinely my one bugbear is when people write poetry and the meter is wrong.
Oh,
Anytime
Yes.
someone writes a poem, I'll check it and I'll be like, okay, but if you actually read it aloud, does this work? And this one, first try, did not have to give you any notes on it. Very happy.
which I'm really happy about because I'm not that as fixated on meter, except for like just what sort of generally sounds good on my ear. So I haven't done the math on this, and I haven't realized that until right now. So don't. If it sounds good, go with it. But yeah, no, I might do that after this and just see how close I came. But no, I'm happy that someone appreciated it at that level.
Very much.
What do we do the entire issue in iambic pentameter?
No, because now that you've said that, you're going to want to do it. And Ryan, I want you to look me in the eyes. Do you know what iambic pentameter is?
100% I know what iambic pentameter is.
Okay.
No, you don't.
It's the way Shakespeare writes.
Okay. Okay. All right.
As somebody
I
who-
am writing the book with a theater graduate. Thank you very much. If anybody knows,
somebody-
he does.
As somebody
That's not a
who
bragging right. What are you doing?
as somebody who made the unfortunate decision, thanks to Radiant Black friend Joe Clark, to write the demon in Nightwing in iambic pentameter because that's how Alan Moore writes his demons. I do not recommend it. It's not worth the all-nighter that it takes, considering how late the scripts are. Don't do it.
This sounds like a challenge.
That's the problem is there's no way to talk these guys out of something once they've started talking about it.
That's true.
I have
So-
3 new villain ideas. None of them are demons.
All of them are speaking in different forms of verse. Look, as long as you pick the one that Dr. Zeus wrote in, because that one is easy. That's just like,
Okay.
if you can read it to Green Eggs and Ham, job done. With that, we come to this last scene between Nathan and Marshall. Kyle, can I say that this scene appears in Radiant Black? I've sort of already said it now, so it's a bit late for me to ask it that way.
Yeah, I don't know, Michael. Can you?
Yeah,
I guess you can.
I don't
we
want
know.
you to get on your high horse about spoiling things in Zooms, okay?
Well, this is a StreamYard, technically.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about this scene and what it does for both these characters. Can you guys talk a little bit about trying to hit both characters' arcs in issues that people might only read half of?
Well, it started with a fight. And no, I mean, I took a swing at it. Ryan took a swing at it. I merged them. Then we argued about whether Dylan would ever say anything supportive to another human being ever or not. And then
That does
Michael
sound like a
stepped
joke,
in.
but that is what it was about, more or less, yeah.
Then Michael ended up stepping in. There was some passive aggressiveness. Suddenly the scene went to print, and now we're locked, and it's in both books. That's basically how Oh, we did it. No, it was fun. Honestly, this stuff is fun. Like, and then the guys did the layouts next to each other for Radiant Black, and it's pretty neat. So it's actually, you know, I could, let me see if I can do this.
See what I mean about Kyle being the one who spoils things on things?
Yeah, I'm not gonna do it. I was gonna show maybe.
No, but you're gonna have to flip through almost the entire issue, and you simply can't risk that.
Yeah, I know. You'll have to wait till next time.
Yeah,
I think for me, what like I it wasn't that I had issues with it. It was just like how I think what I was trying to figure out was how does this scene play into Dylan's arc in the issue. And that's the hard part of it was like that finding that balance between where what you write is definitely required for your issue because there's a lot of Marshall's soul searching going through here, but Dylan responding to like what's Dylan's response and how can that play into it. What ultimately sort of let me take my hands off the wheel on it a little bit was realizing that Dylan's arc is actually the action that happens before that. It's him watching Ari be a part of the story and then sort of singing. Like I think he's already sort of his arc is already sort of to shift a little bit just by him watching Ari fight with him. And then this conversation I think is the last piece of that, which is sort of watching someone else suffer through that, deal with their own sort of like feelings of inadequacy and that. And the idea is that he ultimately, because of that, kind of lets Ari off the hook a little bit because I think he just sort of sees a little bit of himself in that situation. So that's what I kind of I was like, oh, okay, like his stories, like the action I think carried that, so I didn't have to be as precious with. Well, he wouldn't say this and he couldn't do that and all that other stuff.
Yeah,
so.
the pivot for Dylan is not in this moment; it's actually already happened, and he's just vocalizing it for the first time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that brings us almost to the end of the issue, except these guys in trouble. How suspicious is Juliet of what is going on in this house at the moment?
Not very. I think I think Dylan's lie being something that ultimately was like that made Ari look really bad. I think we'll probably buy them a few more days. Like just that idea of like, there's no way he would like. I like my favorite line was like, I'm not getting in trouble for her. That was the thing where I was like, oh, she'll buy it now. Like that's like if my what?
Well, and she's got gargoyles to clean. Like she's got stuff going on at that house that she doesn't know where her kids are. Like,
oh well, can I spoil but tee up something for what's going on?
Please.
We have she plays a pretty big part in this next few issues in regards to what does she do all day. That's something like we're gonna dig into a little bit more of what Juliet does all day and what her
and what kind of wine does she like?
It's more complicated than that. She's not a stay-at-home mom. Yeah. That's not her job. Yeah, so there's a much bigger tapestry that we're going to start to see unfold about her position and the Bell family and all that stuff. So
great, love it.
Very cool.
With that, we've come to the end of the issue. I'd love to take some questions. So if you've got questions, now is the time to start dropping them in the chat. Before we do, is there anything else you guys would like to talk about from this issue?
No, I'm good.
Great.
No, it's exciting to see it come together. Yeah.
I just want to take a second to shout out our amazing artists on both these issues, Abel on both, and Bruno Frenda stepping in on some of the pages on this issues and some pages moving forward as well. Just helping keep us on track and on schedule. But Bruno's doing a great job, and we're really happy to have him.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Totally.
All right. With that, will we do some questions?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Only if they're written in iambic pentameter.
Chris,
I don't even know how to check if they're written in iambic pentameter or not.
Neither do I.
Chris from Comic Tropes, still going. Much love to the Massiverse crew. Thank you, Chris. Hope your stream tonight was fun. From Jason, Rogue Sun, Hellbent, Reluctant team up when?
To be determined. But yeah, you'll see more Hellbent, I promise. Hellbent's not gone at all.
All Kyle, can you put up this one from I don't know how to put a comment up on the screen. Can I?
Oh, Michael, can you see the starred comments?
Yes, if I do this. There we go. I know how to do it now. Can
There
we
we go.
expect more crossovers with Radiant Black and Rogue Sun, or crossovers in general outside of annual supermassives? I think I will say not frequent, maybe not never, but I think there's two things. One is we are really, really, really adamant that each book has to be readable on its own. And so, I think the way that we made this crossover work is really effective in that if you're just reading the Radiant Black side, if you're just reading the Rogue Sun side, it will work. I think that's a trick that we probably don't want to be pulling like every 3 months. So we're not going to do it all the time. And the other thing is, it has to be much like, doing an issue that's a flip book or a choose your own adventure. It has to make sense for the stories of both of those books when we do it. It can't just be like, oh, it's been a while since anyone did anything, let's get the Dead Lucky here. It has to be, oh, this would be a great moment for the Dead Lucky to show up, and we can do that, so let's do it. So I wouldn't, sometimes, maybe, but certainly I wouldn't expect one all the time, is what I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the only thing I would add to that, though, is I don't know that it necessarily has to be a crossover, but I do think characters appearing in each other's books can happen, even if it's one-sided. Like we did have Shift pop into the Dead Lucky last year or the year before, whenever that was, to kick off Arc 2. There are a couple different villains. Well, there are some different characters in the universe in general who might make appearances in Radiant Black coming up. But as Michael said, it does have to make sense for the story and fit what we're doing that month.
And if we do, it'd be really cool.
This is a question from another Michael. Will Dylan get a Rogue Sun bike or car for a situation where he can't fly?
Oh man, I feel like if we got a Rogue Sun bike, I was just like, I'm gonna get a call from Marvel.
Just goes, okay.
It's just pushing it. But that's a good idea. We'll definitely talk to the licensors and the merchandiser people before we do that. The Rogue Sun plane. I do love the idea of him getting a plane when he can fly. There's just something funny about that.
Is the plane on fire?
Oh God, yes.
Yeah,
It'd be just would look. I love the idea of people seeing it and just be like, "It's crashing." It's like, no, it's just flying. It's fine.
That's
What if you
it's
do-
meant to look like.
Ryan, what if that's his go to space plane?
Yeah, exactly. Oh God, Rogue Sun in space,
Just on fire. Yeah.
Isn't that your territory? That's not my territory.
Also, the fire would go out.
We don't
in
do
space
fire.
'cause it needs oxygen.
True.
No, you
That's
just
true.
start pumping oxygen to it. It's magic fire. It never goes out.
Yeah,
Space doesn't trump magic fire.
that's my quote of the day right there. I think it's the quote of the day.
All right. This question from Comic Tropes. Are there any sci-fi or supernatural concepts that are not possible in the Massiverse, or is anything fair game?
I think that it's funny. Each book has its own flavor, and I really like that from the jump, Ryan, you and I really kind of took two sides. Like you took supernatural and more, which tends to lean or can lean more horror if you want it, and I took more sci-fi, and that leans more cosmic. I would say that like from there, the third being like true crime with like no one, but even all of that, like everything's kind of in the same kind of ballpark to some extent. So I know like each book has its own identity as well, as far as like the types of villains that make sense or the types of characters that make sense in that book. Like it was weird to have a werewolf vampire in Radiant Black. But then at the same time, during the Catalyst War, when Marcello drew the interior of one of the accretion ships, there were all sorts of weird creatures and and shit like that. So I think anything is fair game, but it ultimately does have to feel like it fits within the line. I mean, Michael, it's a good question for you as well.
No one's pitched anything, I don't think, where that really felt like, oh no, this would break the universe too much for us to do it. So that's not to say that there isn't anything, but I mean, part of that is, as we're building out a book, like, Rogue Sun has a tone that has developed what the range of tones in the Massiveverse is. And so, like, you guys wouldn't pitch something outside Rogue Sun's tone for Rogue Sun. So anything that's in Rogue Sun fits the tone of the Massiveverse. It, like, self-reinforces itself in that way.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's something you guys could pitch where I would be like, absolutely not, I'm sorry. I just don't know what. Like, if someone pitched a book where the Earth was flat, for instance, like, that just breaks too many other things that have to be true for the rest of the universe to hold together.
Second.
Yeah.
I get really worried at some point that Kyle's going to blow up the moon, and then I'm going to spend the rest of my life giving notes to other people like, hey, I'm sorry, there's no moon. You actually can't draw the moon because the moon got blown up.
Or we just have it with CHA just carved into it. You know, just leave it like that. Yeah.
Yeah, he started writing his own name into it.
Yeah.
Listen, this pro-moon nonsense that keeps getting scuttled about, I don't know where it's coming from, but you need to look at the money. That's all I'm saying.
That's true. I think the thing that I would say about it is that I think the one thing that I'm thoughtful about whenever we pitch anything or come up with any stories is like that this does take place in a universe, and so if we're gonna do something that's so big, it's like if you're gonna pitch something big, and then you better be able to like let the other book know and see if that's something that they can lean into. I think that's actually one of the things that's kind of fun. It was like, you know, there was some conversation about like when you were doing the Callus Wars, like, okay, how far do we want that to extend? Do we want like Rogue Sun to be dealing with that all the time? And so we kind of found that middle ground where it's like, well, you know, just because there's like a wildfire and, you know, like when the fires happened in LA, that was everybody was talking about it, raising money for it, blah blah blah, but they weren't dealing with it in their daily life. So that was the kind of the way that we did it. I remember there's several moments in Rogue Sun where the people are referencing what's going on in Chicago. So I feel like that was the closest way we could do it. But yeah, I think, you know, I don't think there's anything that I've thought of yet. I think the actual fun part sometimes is to come up with an area of the Massiverse we haven't done something in yet, and then kind of like be like, what's that over there, you know?
I think there are a couple areas that are possibilities for that sort of thing. I mean, Ryan, you and I have talked about things at different points as well. Yeah. I think like ultimately what it really comes down to is like the central concept, the character, and like what and how the book has to be doing something kind of left of center that still feels like it's forward thinking with regards to like superheroes and, you know, the world. In order to fit in our kind of like world outside your window, but also, you know, superheroes that feel really contemporary and not like analogs of old stuff. Like there has to be kind of a new kind of take on it. And that really just comes down to taste, honestly. Like it's hard to really put into words why some things work and some things don't. There have been a few things over the years that have come up that have been almost books. There's one in particular I'm thinking of, and it's like it would have worked, but we all kind of felt like it would be a challenge, and we couldn't quite put our finger on why it didn't feel right, and ultimately we didn't do it, but we had a lot of conversation about it. So the longer we're around, the more the universe kind of firms up for us as well, and then it kind of starts to take care of itself as far as what can really be added into it without feeling out of place.
Yeah. It needs to have a smart ass at the center of it. It has to have like a smart ass anti-hero kid, otherwise it doesn't.
And a QR code.
There you go.
Question here from Jason: is Ori the first female Rogue Sun?
Nope.
Thomason alone. I mean, we've seen
Thomason's not a Rogue Sun.
Thomason wasn't. Rogue Sun, right? Duh.
Yeah, but yeah, there was other ones that are female. Yes.
Yeah, I think like that's one of those things where, and I think there's even questions in this chat about exploring the history of the Rogue Suns and who some Rogue Suns are, and sort of much like we were just saying, like there's a lot of, I know you guys have got ideas that even we haven't talked about, like there's a lot of history there, but it can't just be like, here is just an issue about it that is unconnected to everything else. It has to be, this book is Dylan's story. Yeah. And so it has to tie into Dylan's story in some way.
Right. I can say this. We have pitched like Tales of the, I think whenever I'm running into some sort of like writer's block, I'm like, oh, Tales from the Rogue Sons, and which is a random Rogue Sun story that I wanted to tell. And they're like, no, Ryan, it's got to connect with the actual story. But I go, but it would be so cool. And you're like, come on, man, like get back on track. So I will someday when I get really drunk at a convention, I'll tell you guys all about it. Yeah.
Or we'll just do it. Mr. Parrott, if Rogue Sun were to get an adaptation, do you want it to be animated or live action like Tokusatsu?
Animated 100%, just because I think there's some like the fire and the flames.
The fire is the real killer on live action, isn't it?
Yeah, it makes it really, really hard because like when I don't mean to shit on the shows. Well, I mean, I'm not gonna say that because that's gonna make that. But never forget to say anything. I can't take that back. But yeah. Yeah. So animated because it'd be fun.
That's something we talked about regarding like merch as well. It's like if you did a Rogue Sun helmet, would it have to come with like a can of gasoline? And you just sort of, there we go. There is the question.
Right.
It's like, yeah, how can it be on fire?
Do you guys remember we were talking about merch? I don't know if you did this with this, but do you remember that shirt that was like really popular in the mid '90s, which was like a Shark Attack shirt, but it had like bite marks underneath the you guys remember this? No one knows this? There's a shirt that's like Shark Attack, and then it has like the shirt always had like a bite in underneath the sleeves. And I remember it was really cheesy, but I was always like, we should do a Rogue Sun shirt that's like half burned, like just like complete, just all half black. They're out there. Look up the shark bite shirt. It's real.
Absolutely.
That is outside my pay grade.
Will Rogue Sun be getting a hardcover release? Michael, what's the official position of hardcover releases in the Massiverse?
I think the official position, and you could correct me if I'm wrong about this, is we'd love to, but we're sort of like, these things are logistically quite complicated, and I don't want to bring it down, but especially in the last couple of months, these things have only become much more complicated because, spoiler alert, these things get mostly printed in China. So we would love to. We are still sort of trying to play out the numbers on how Radiant Black Volume 1 did. And as soon as we've got something to tell you, like, we're not going to keep it a secret once it's ready to go. You'll know as soon as we have something to announce. But at present, there is nothing for us to announce.
Yeah, but we'd like to.
We'd sure like to. I'd love to. I've started the design file already.
I've seen it. Looks great. Okay. All right. Well, unless there's any more here that I'm missing, or Michael, do you see any more that?
I'd like to. There's one more that I'd like to do because I'd like to know the answer personally. Are there any other Rogue Sun villains you want to return to, Ryan and Nick? So, I mean, we talked a little bit about, some future appearance of Hellbent. But you guys have created a lot of these folks at this point. Is there anyone who really sits in your mind as like, oh, we should do something with them again someday?
Nick, you got one? You're muted.
You're muted again.
Gotcha.
Oh, now he's frozen.
How's that?
No, he's back.
You got
it. There we go.
Yeah.
We fixed it.
All right. Yeah. Alienator, right? Like the depth of that character can never be fully mined. Yeah. So the big trick for us is figuring out ways to get our villains back into rotation. But no, everyone is fair game in terms of interest, and I think a lot of people are we're gonna be seeing more. But and then I have a favorite, and it just depends on what choices we make in the near future.
I would say I have two answers.
I got it, Nick. I got it.
I have two choices. One, I really like the design for Mad Melody. I really loved that concept of somebody who that was like not a one-off, but like we needed a villain for like an opening sequence, and it's like this kind of son of a fun thing. And I remember I loved the design. And then when we figured out who the character was, somebody who wanted to be a singer who hadn't, and then made a deal with Morningstar and that made her voice a weapon. And now it was that monkey's paw element of like, oh wow, now she's like cursed with this thing and just has like gone insane. I was like, I want to see that. I want to see that character in action a little bit more. So that's one character. And then there is one that I desperately that's an unshown villain that Nick's already laughing at, that I desperately want to bring in. We just have to find the right way to do it, because
is this the one that you were briefly pitching for the start of this arc?
Yes, it was the one I was briefly pitching. Yeah.
I
know
we got to
who this
work
is.
that out.
Yeah, we have to do it. Like, if I don't, it'll be the most popular villain we ever had. I swear to God.
You got to use him more than. You got to give him space. You got to.
I know, and this is why we've been trying to figure out a way to do it. Like, we brought it in, and then we're like, no, and like. Yeah, like I think I got on a call with you guys, or like G-chatted everybody, like, oh, I've got this idea for a villain, and they were like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah.
Actually, to revisit the earlier question, that's one of the first times I was like, I don't know if we can do this in this universe. This might actually cross a line.
It's so good. And then Kyle's Kelly, friend of the. Did the covers for 13? Yeah, she's named that character. That is the name of the character. So thank you for doing that, Kelly. You appreciate it.
Yeah, trust me.
Dropped
you'll
in to
know
see if I wanted to buy the
to.
Rogue. Yes, dropped in to see if I wanted to buy the Rogue Sun version of the crossover, and now I needed to read Rogue Sun. Damn it, they got me.
Victory.
Thank you very much, Jesse. That's
why we're here.
That was the goal. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, so I guess we should mention, if you have made it this far and are not caught up on Rogue Sun, well done.
Sorry.
Honestly, genuinely. 4 volumes collect everything through issue 24. They are all available now. They're all in print. If your comic shop doesn't have them, they can order them for you from the distributor. And then issues 25 and 26 are both out right now, so you can be totally caught up.
There we go.
With that, guys, I think we will come to the end. So, Radiant Black 33, the other half of this crossover, is out. Is that out this week, Kyle?
No, next week.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Yes, that is true. It's out next week. Rogue Sun issue 27 will be out on May 21st, so a couple of weeks away, with more issues to come shortly after that. Guys, where can people find you online if they want to check out your stuff?
I'm at that Ryan Parrott 2 R's 2 T's on Blue Sky. That's usually where I'm at.
At Nicholas J. Cotton on Twitter/X.
I'm primarily on Instagram now at Kyle D. Higgins, and then our newsletter you want to make sure you're subscribed to at blackmarket.la.
Great. And with that, thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll be back in a month or so to talk about the next issue. Thank you all very much, and thank you guys for watching.
Thanks,
All right, see everybody soon.
Clippers!
There's nothing worse than uninvited guests, except maybe out-of-towners. This week, we go Radiant. Do I really have to say that? I don't care if his book sells better. People have dumb taste. With our first Massiverse crossover, when Radiant Black hits Bourbon Street and gives me a distraction from Ari totally not listening to me. Grab your copy of Rogue Sun 26 today, and let's show these Chicago losers how we do things here in the Bayou.